I'm Don Coyne, everyone, CEO of ANZ Biochar Industry Group, ANZBIG. So I welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today. It's fantastic to see such a diverse group of professionals from the water industry, biochar sector, research, community, government and sustainability experts coming together for this important discussion. At ANZBIG, we are committed to advancing biochar industry in Australia and New Zealand by fostering collaboration, innovation and market development. Today's webinar is a reflection of that mission as we explore how biochar and water management can work together to deliver circular economy benefits, carbon sequestration opportunities and enhanced environmental outcomes. A key driver behind today's conversation is our Memorandum of Understanding with the Water Services Association of Australia, WASA. This partnership marks an exciting step forward in aligning biochar solutions in the water sector's sustainability goals, resource recovery strategies, and climate resilience efforts. Through this collaboration, we aim to identify barriers to biochar adoption in water treatment and management, highlight real-world applications where biochar is already delivering benefits, and explore new business models and policy pathways to scale up implementation. Our expert panel today will delve into some of the most pressing questions. How can biochar contribute to water treatment, stormwater management and nutrient recovery? What partnerships are needed to accelerate adoption in the water sector? What research and policy changes can support biochar's recognition in water management? Biochar has enormous potential to improve water quality, repurpose organic waste, and provide long-term carbon sequestration benefits. But for it to be fully integrated, we need to work together across industries, government, and research institutions. Who is ANZBIG? The Australian-New Zealand Biochar Industry Group is the peak body dedicated to advancing biochar as a key solution for carbon sequestration, sustainable agriculture, and circular economy outcomes. We represent over 200 members across government, industry, research, and technology sectors, supporting biochar producers, users, and innovators through industry development, policy advocacy, roadmaps and standards, knowledge sharing, research, technical resources and publications, collaboration, partnering with aligned industries and government initiatives, market expansion, promoting biochar applications and economic benefits. So I would encourage you to get involved with ANZBIG. You can become a member and join a growing network of biochar industry leaders and innovators. And you can sign up today at anzbig.org. Calls for abstracts are now open for our Biochar Expo 2025. So we are now accepting abstracts for presentations at what is our 6th conference. Submit your research, case studies or innovations to be featured at the premier biochar event. You can sponsor Biochar Expo 2025 and that will align your brand with the fastest growing biochar industry event. Various sponsorship packages are available to showcase your business to key stakeholders and industry leaders. So for more information on memberships, abstracts, or sponsorships, please contact myself at execdirect@anzbig.org and let's drive the biochar revolution together. So thank you again for being part of this conversation and I look forward to the discussions ahead. I will now hand it over to our facilitators today, Jason Mingo, who's Manager for Strategy and Sustainability at WASA, and Craig Bagnall, Technical Advisory and Executive Board Member at ANZBIG. So over to you, Jason, first for a few words.
Thanks very much, Don. Yeah, as Don noted, I manage strategy and sustainability at WASA. So the body that looks after our sort of circular economy and sustainability portfolio with the work that we do at WASA. But just briefly, for those of you who maybe are not aware of who WASA is. We're the Water Services Association of Australia, and we're the peak body for water utilities across the country, as well as members across the Tasman within New Zealand as well. And so kia ora to any of those who will be calling in or listening in today. We've had a long running relationship with ANZBIG now. I think it goes back a good couple of years, and it very much relates to how biochar can effectively address the challenges we have as a sector, but then also looking forward to the opportunities biochar presents. And no doubt, I think we will aim to cover both of these as part of and during the panel discussion. Our role, however, is probably more looking at what the regulatory, legislative, and policy barriers and enablers there are, and how we can work together with the expertise both from ANZBIG's perspective, as well as our own members, to work towards those kind of recommendations and really advocating for the sort of the potential reviews and change needed, which will make the development of biochar more viable and feasible now and into the future. So that's just sort of a brief commentary from my side, and to give you a sense of WASA's involvement within the space. But I'll now hand over to Craig to sort of just give a bit of an introduction to the house rules, and for us to then get started with the panel. Thanks, Craig.
Thanks, Jason, and welcome everybody. Should be a good program today. Before we go too much further, I'd just like to thank Jason and WASA and many of the water utility members who are present today for all of the support they've given to the biochar industry and working with us. As Jason mentioned, we're already working closely with them on things like the end of waste code for biochar in Queensland and doing a lot of technical and policy work together. So I wanted to just say a quick shout out and thank you to the industry. For a number of years of support now. It's been really beneficial to both of us, so thank you. Just before we kick off and go into the introduction to all the panel members shortly, I'd just like to go through the house rules. So we'd like to have a free-flowing discussion today. We'd like to engage with the panelists by having you tag your questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat. So please feel free to use the chat between yourselves, but if you want to ask questions, put them in the Q&A box specifically, and put capitals with before your question of what it might be about. So for example, you want to talk about barriers, please put the word barriers in capitals at the start of your question. And if possible, maybe put your name and your organization too, so we've got some context. So that's probably it. We're aiming to not have a robotic Q&A type of session with the panel today. We're looking for a fairly free-flowing and opportunity to genuinely learn from each other and to understand the work that's taking place across both sectors, and for us to learn and create a shared picture of how we can move forward with the opportunities on how biochar can provide these advantages to water management. So without further ado, I'd like to just ask each of the panel members to introduce yourselves, please, and highlight the journey you've had so far with biochar. So you've got 5 minutes each. I might kick off with Eamon Casey, who's coming up first on my screen in large size. So Eamon, would you like to kick off for us, please, mate?
Great. Yeah, thanks, Craig. So Eamon Casey, I'm the technical director of IOTA. And for those who don't know, IOTA is the commercial arm and wholly owned subsidiary of Southeast Water. Southeast Water being one of the 3 water retailers, publicly owned water retailers in Melbourne. So Southeast Water have quite a long journey in considering alternative pathways for biosolids. It was back in 2015-16 that we sponsored, or at least we worked closely with RMIT in looking at the potential for what we at the time called a Plan B pathway for biosolids, converting it to biochar using fluidized bed. RMIT had a lot of expertise in fluidized bed technology, so we wanted to turn that to, we wanted them to look at that from a biosolids perspective. That was 10 years ago. Over the last 10 years, we went through a Mark 0 semi-pilot plant within RMIT's facility that then evolved to a Mark 1 pilot plant, which was hosted by Greater Western Water in Melton. And then in 2023, we had a Mark 2 pilot plant, which included gas phase treatment, again hosted by Greater Western Water in Melton. And that Mark 2 pilot plant was also run in the last number of months processing biosolids from 8 different utilities in Australia. So we're well down the pathway of biosolids processing for the production of biochar in terms of the technology side of things. We were fortunate enough to secure CRCP funding last year for that group. So Southeast Water is building the first demonstration plant for this Pyroco technology. It's a heat recovery fluidized bed technology out of RMIT, and we should be operational in early 2026. So pretty exciting times. That plant will have a capacity of 2.5 dry tons per day, so about 100 kilograms per hour. So it's a very interesting time for us in terms of how that's progressed. And I suppose the rationale why we went down this research collaboration with RMIT rather than buying a solution off the shelf. I think back in 2016, 17, before the investment in pilot plants, we did a review of the technologies in the market, and or mostly the technologies used for biomass being converted into solutions for biosolids. And at that stage, that market was quite immature. We felt that there was a lot of potential benefits of a fluidized bed in terms of the scale-up potential, the energy transfer efficiencies, the simplicity of the rig with no moving parts, that it was worthwhile investing in the research, because we thought that if all things work out as planned at that stage, we'd have a solution which was really set up for biosolids and for the scale that we're looking for. So it's been a long journey, and a very methodical journey, and probably slower than we would have liked, but that's the nature of the research side of things. So we're really pleased where we are at the moment. I think we're in pretty good shape considering the regulatory change. And of course, when we kicked off this journey, it was a plan B, and we some people with a bit of foresight saw potential barriers with our biosolids to land application, but we had no idea that these emerging contaminants that we're facing now was going to be what hit us. But so we're fortunate in some ways that we had plan B in mind from a long way back.
Fantastic. Thanks, Eamon. Look, I'm sure that there'll be a lot more discussion today on some of those shifting goalposts that you've mentioned just there, and we'll go through those in due course. But congratulations on the work that's happened down there and the success with IOTA and Southeast Water and partners on that. It's been great. Jason Cotton, would you like to introduce yourself with IWM, mate?
Yeah, thank you very much, Craig. Jason Cotton, I'm the Program Director of the Intelligent Water Networks, or IWN. IWN is a program of VicWater being the peak body for water in Victoria. We were established about 15 or so years ago to really drive the exploration and adoption of innovation and technology in the water sector. Those of you from Victoria will know that we've got 18 water authorities, each independent water corporations. So our role is to bring together not just research development, but the application, trials, and then adoption of innovations. So we've been a partner with IOTA and Southeast Water and Barwon Water and a bunch of water authorities and RMIT University in the Pyroco trials. My first experience with biochar was back as the innovation manager of Western Water, which was one of the organisations that was merged to form Greater Western Water back in the day. And I see this as, while it may have started out as a plan B for the treatment of biosolids, I actually see this as a biochar production process. I think that we're now at the level of sophistication where we're deliberately creating different blends of input materials from biosolids and other materials like FOGO, and we've used straws and other materials. John will talk about what they're doing in the trials that we're supporting with his organisation. And we're creating biochars of different characteristics for different use cases, and that's terribly exciting. So we're getting away from this notion of it's now it's a waste treatment process to actually it's a biochar production process. It just so happens to use some inputs from biosolids, and I see that as terribly exciting. We've done everything from with RMIT University creating a prototype supercapacitor from biochar. The whole notion of turning human waste into electronics is terribly exciting. We've created sodium-ion battery anodes with Deakin University and Biochar Water as a project. Again, terribly exciting. So it's gone beyond just we're going to chuck this stuff onto land and grow some crops, although that is a valid use case. And as Wendy Timms will talk about a little bit later, there's some strong benefits for that use case. But this opens up a whole new world. I've spoken to the National Transport Research Organisation about the advantages of biochar and road base. We're looking at biochar being added into concrete, and we've spoken with 3D concrete printing organisations. This space is growing, and biochar seems to have a wide variety of applications and use cases. That's been a little bit of my journey with biochar over the last 6 years, and hope it continues in earnest. And hopefully during the day we'll talk about some of the barriers to that journey continuing. But thanks very much for having me along and on the panel today. Cheers. You're on mute, Craig.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, and I'm sure there's going to be a fair few questions on just some of the things you mentioned. I mean, for starters, I'm really keen to hear about the sodium carbon battery work and where that's up to and things like that. So we'll come back to it later, but thank you so much. Good segue maybe across to John from Northeast Water. John, would you like to tell us about, introduce yourself and tell us about your journey with biochar at Northeast Water, please, mate?
Yeah, thanks, Craig, and thanks for the opportunity to come along today, and Don for organising it. Just our journey, I'm the General Manager for Northeast Water for Operations and Environment, and our journey on this has been a long one, back to 2010 when we worked with NECMA, which is the catchment authority for the Northeast. And they were actually, we were working with them at the time because they had started a project where they had a lot of willow waste that they were removing from to protect river and waterways, but they were removing willows but had a lot of willow waste. They didn't know what to do with that willow waste, and they approached us about a trial with Earth Systems at the time to trial biochar through their what was a containerized system back then in 2010. To see if they could turn that willow waste into a carbon product that could be used on soil. But they approached us because, and we've got a good working relationship with the Catchment Authority, and Campbell led that work, and was really around, could we use that carbon product for removing blue-green algae as we use powdered activated carbon and granulated activated carbon. And there was a conversation around our treatment processes, and then it sort of stuck for Campbell that maybe that was an opportunity. At the time, to be honest with you, Craig, we looked at it and went, yeah, nice, but no, it's easier just to buy the stuff than mucking around with this. And it was very containerized, very hands-on to, load up the container and make the biochar and tip it out. And Earth Systems were on a very early journey then. And so we sort of separated and trialed it. It did work. It worked in some of the cases, but we left it at that. At the time, we were spreading our biosolids onto soil, which we currently still do. And even under the NEMP 3, I'm quite happy to spread biosolids. It just means the amount that we spread is limited because of risk. So there wasn't a real need or a driver in the business for it around biosolids. What our real driver came later when supply chains during COVID and alike started to become strained with powdered activated carbon and other chemicals and pricing. So we had a blue-green algae event in the Northeast in around about 2018-19. And we were spending up to $500,000 in powdered activated carbon. So that was really our driver to start looking at, could we make, and it sort of then started to have conversations. And I went to the Carbon Farmers Conference in Albury just by coincidence and ran into Don, and then ran back into the Earth Systems guys who I hadn't seen for ages. And of course, their technology had moved on significantly since then. So we started to talk about the opportunity of possibly making a powdered activated carbon out of woody materials, and still wasn't even thinking about the biosolids part. And then we had at a site that we had to take over, which was a trade waste site that had contaminated levels of PFAS in its biosolids. So it was well contained on site. We did that whole process and understood what we had there, and there was no impact to the community, but we had this pile of old biosolids that was PFAS contaminated. That's when we started to have a conversation with Earth Systems. Well, we've been doing this work looking at powdered activated carbon, but what if we put the biochar through? Could we actually start to break down and destruct PFAS? Because there was some initial study and through some university research we've done that was one way of managing PFAS in biosolids. So that led to us approaching Jason and through the IWN, and I've had a long association with the IWN and currently leading the gas group in that group at the moment to understand about biogas and biomethane. So it was a good opportunity to link up with IWN to say, well, how about we run this trial? We're agnostic to systems that we use, but Earth Systems, we did approach Earth Systems because we'd had some conversations with Adrian around, could we do this? And he was pretty keen that yes, you could. So we've run the trials. We've done phase 1 of those trials this year, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. But the outcomes of that is, yes, we could actually destroy and destruct the PFAS and PFOA compounds. In fact, we got all of those other than a PFAS compound, which we got a 99.6 removal or destruction of the compound. So, and Adrian, as his usual optimistic self, said, look, if we had more time to muck around with it, because it was only a 1-day trial, he thinks we could have got 100% quite easily with a bit more pre-treatment and a bit longer in the pyrolysis unit. So that's changed our whole world now around, well, okay, so does this now look at moving to phase 2, which is treating all of that biosolids waste? And if I was to put that in a truck and take it to Melbourne and have it destroyed, it's around $6 million. So I'm sort of saying, well, $6 million to do that, or $6 million to build our own machine, roughly about that, to treat that over a couple of years. And then I could use that to make my own powdered activated carbon. So we trialed lucerne. So we make around 7,000 to 8,000 tonnes of lucerne a year. So that is a good product for making your own powdered activated carbon. So we trialed that. And yes, that worked really well as well. So, I see the opportunity for the water industry around biochar. It's not just about biosolids. I think that's one section to it. But I think there's also another section around, we're now having conversations with the waste that, just like that willow waste we looked at when we first started this journey, we've now looking and having conversations with forestry around their waste that's left to rot in the countryside when they, change over the forestry, do deforestation and then grow again. So taking that woody waste and actually making powdered activated carbon or a carbon product, which is now grown into a project again with IWN of putting that into large socks, and then putting it into waterways, small waterways, channel systems, that when farmers get blue-green algae, if we get a toxic species, it may be a way of actually cleaning up the water for agriculture so they can use water if we get a toxic species of blue-green algae. So that was a long sort of journey, Craig, but that's where we've landed.
Well, outstanding. And I'm sure there's going to be more questions later. Hopefully you've answered a fair few of them. Thank you very much, John. Fantastic story. And for those who don't know, Earth Systems is one of the longest operating and founding members of ANSPIC. And Dr. Adrian Morford is who John was talking about there, one of the most knowledgeable people in Australia on it. I'd like to also do our final welcome now for Ben Bryant from Icon Water in the ACT. Ben, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us what your journey's been? It's obviously been a long one.
Yuma, everyone, Yuma is Ngunnawal language here for hello. So that's our acknowledgement there. Basically, as Craig said, I'm with Icon Water, which is Canberra's water and wastewater utility. So that means from catchment to tap, and then from toilet to river, everything in between. So we're really gifted with purpose by doing that. And we're Australia's largest inland wastewater treatment plant. So it means we've got some really good scale. And I think people appreciate that today about the water industry having scale, because we should think about us being industries and quite good influences. But for Icon Water, why we're here, we were gifted with foresight. Because the ACT is this little island in New South Wales, they wanted to make sure biosolids had a great home. We have been producing agri-ash since the 1970s. And agri-ash is through a multi-hearth furnace incinerator, and it's making an ash that's high in calcium. So it's used as a liming agent, even though it also has a whole hell of a lot of phosphorus in it. And so it's really one of those very early beneficial reuse stories. And we wanted to sustain that. So as you might imagine though, 1970s technology is starting to get a little bit old. And so we've been on the last nearly a decade now on a biosolids treatment replacement process. And so we've done quite a lot of optioneering where greenhouse gas emissions and circular economy featured really heavily. And were the key determinant with us, with our shareholders, with our stakeholders, with our regulators, and also with the community in choosing to go ahead with a heat treatment technology again. And that's with gasification. But what I think is most curious that I really wanted to highlight for people today is the community were initially a bit doubtful about a heat treatment process. We do have a moratorium on new proposals for waste to energy here in ACT, which we'd get caught up in potentially, but not at this site because it's grandfathered. But what we did through community education was people walked out of that room being big supporters of biochar and this technology because of two reasons. And this surprised us as well. One is it deals with microplastics, and the other one is that it actually has less truck movements through their suburbs. Instead of 10 trucks a day of biosolids, it's 1 truck per day of agri-ash. And that makes a really concentrated, highest use order material. That's also, we'll touch on it later, but it's an IPCC negative emissions technology. We're working to try and get an Australian carbon credit unit method. Like, it just stacks up and up and up. And so for us, we just really wanted to focus on making that highest order product. And so to pan back, really over the decade, it's really about reframing ourselves as the water industry, and that perhaps then goes over to the biochar industry. We thought of ourselves as the water industry. We then thought, oh, actually, we're part of the waste industry too. We handle more organics curbside, by our wastewater treatment. So that's solids, pee, poo, and paper in water. And we take those solids out. We're handling more organics than BOGO curbside collection. We're a major user of this material. We then pivoted to then focus on resource recovery and circularity. Everyone knows about that focus. And then I also think we're on the cusp of recognizing ourselves as these carbon enterprises. Carbon being, if you pair back and look at it, we're moving carbon around. We're doing phase change in materials from gas, liquid, and solid phase. And so that's really what we're doing. Even though we might talk about doing worldwide scans for technology and potting mix and plant trials and all the things we'll cover today, that's the game we're in. And so for us here in Canberra, just to give people an idea of scale, it's about 15,000 tonnes per annum of solid material we handle and deal with. And for us now, we've really cracked a really good circular economy story. We're not talking soils today, but I'll briefly plug that we've now managed to combine our water treatment solids, which takes impurities out of drinking water, and combine that with soil to make a new blended soil product. And that's got good water holding potential and all these benefits. I can only imagine how even more amazing it'd be with biochar in it as well. So I think us making our own products for net good in the community is a really good focus. And what I will highlight is you see 4 panelists here today. We all know each other. We come across each other because we're collaborators, not competitors in the water industry. We've got this privileged monopoly position where we do purpose, but it means we play really well together. And so we all learn from each other and leapfrog. And so that's why I've also got a few other roles here today. And so we've got various WASA committees, like communities of practice on circular economy, which we're part of. We're working with Circular Australia and the Australian Water Association on various industry task forces, which are informing the Circular Economy Ministerial Advisory Group. We are looking to connect, build, grow. And it's great to be here. I'm also a member of ANZBIG. We're here putting a real focus on this because basically having heat treatment on the table is something just like chemicals, biological or physical processes. It's a key thing to upcycle and make good. So that's my pitch, Craig. It's an opening volley.
And a good volley too. Thanks, mate. Yeah, look, obviously these, as Ben just mentioned, all of the utilities work well together. There are obviously a couple of other pilots that we've heard well from, and people may well say, for example, Pyrocal and the work up there at Loganholme, and other pilots, including the ones I'm working on as well. There's other pilots running around that have been doing fantastic work in the country that have had some exposure before. This here is highlighting some of the new work that everyone else is doing. So congratulations to the panel. I'll move across now to Jason to move on to the next question to you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Great insights there. And I'll actually aim to pick up on some of those insights, I think, as part of a question around if you can comment on the kind of the growth and interest and attention that biochar has been receiving. And I think within those introductions you've given, there's definitely been some key insights. And so I'll throw it all out there in sort of an order in which we got the introductions from you all. But please feel free to add and comment additionally, especially when it comes to, how biochar fits. And Ben, you've made mention of sort of circular economy, that element of resource recovery, and how maybe biochar fits, or is it sort of, are you seeing being competitor to that sort of land application of biosolids, John, that you made mention of, or kind of the energy recovery and or composting as well. So let me throw it all out there, and then I'll hand it out to the panel. So, for example, Eamon, you've mentioned this journey Southeast Water's been on, and the support from Biota. I'm curious as to understand how and why you've been able to sustain that level of commitment as part of the sort of from that initial research and bench and lab scale to now kind of almost a full scale towards commercialization of some of the technology that you've developed, and what have been maybe some of those challenges along the way. I'll then come to Jason and John to sort of really understand, as part of this work, and it's really interesting for the conversation around the blending, because I don't think that gets necessarily discussed enough when it comes to sort of the opportunity around biochar use and application within the sector. What's been a kind of a key driver or motivator behind that shift? And John, you've touched on some of those elements, but I'm interested to understand, is that for, how do you get that balance between an internal application of that kind of end product versus the opportunities within the market, right? So the market aspect is key for our discussion today. And then Ben, from your side, keen to understand whether sort of, if you can comment on the fact of the process and strategic direction that Icon is going towards. Are you excited by the level of investment that's going to create, or are there some risks or concerns that you're seeing as, I suppose the question that might be on everyone's lips is sort of putting all the eggs into the proverbial biochar basket. All right, so there's happy to come back from the panel and see if you wanted me to kind of refresh, and I'll do my best to do so. But Eamon, we'll come back to you.
Great, thanks, Jason. It's an interesting question. I think Southeast Water has had a sizable research and development group for over 10 years, which means there's been a lot of collaboration with universities over that period. And I think that's benefited enormously from a dedicated research and development group. That really was the seed for all of this development. When we moved from research to small pilot scale and into proper pilot scale, there's a lot more money involved. And then that becomes more challenging, of course. So really, I think we've been fortunate that the risks for Plan A have Plan A being biosolids to land, of which all of Southeast Water's biosolids were applied to land. The risks associated with that approach have been increasing steadily for 5 or 6 years with an understanding of emerging contaminants, albeit not regulated at that stage. So it's the changing regulatory environment has facilitated the investment as that risk has grown. And that's really the reality of it. Our business case to develop a demonstration scale is based on risk, but it's also based on our net zero emissions requirements or our commitments.
Yeah.
So we're looking at, almost 20% reduction in Scope 1 emissions from our treatment plant by converting biosolids to biochar. And that includes the issues with stockpiling of biosolids and land application of biosolids, all with its own emissions footprint. And then there's, of course, the cost factor. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about the costs as the webinar goes on. But so it is challenging to get investment in R&D, and to go from research to demonstration scale is always quite challenging, and mostly because it's sourcing of funding. So we've been very fortunate to get support from government, but also there's a pressing need and a rising risk, which has really benefited the whole project.
And so with that, I mean, is there sort of, as part of that, you've kind of, I think, touched on those sort of push factors, but has the pull factor in the way of kind of market opportunity further aided and supported that business case internally, and to kind of continue to seek that investment with the kind of, that risk challenge on the horizon becoming more and more evident?
Look, there is definitely a very large opportunity space in this, by producing a high quality circular economy product. No question, but at this stage, that's quite hard to quantify. It's fair to say that from a biosolids derived biochar perspective, we're in a chicken and egg situation. There's very little being produced. Logan, of course, has led the way, to their credit, in producing biosolids derived biochar. But as a market, the market isn't established yet. And until we start producing it, it's going to take time to develop that market. So there's lack of certainty, but huge opportunity in that space. So that's what we need to navigate.
Okay.
Absolutely agree, Eamon. Yeah.
I guess, do you want to comment further on that, Ben?
Yeah, I will. I'll round back to that, Eamon, because I absolutely agree. I think it's a point worth hitting. But in opening, Jason provoked me and said, how confident are we? What's going on? So I just calculated some sums, the 1970s to now. For 20,000 days, we have been using heat treatment technology to make an ash using our current furnace. And we do that using the embodied energy in biosolids. So for those who aren't familiar, it's almost like the calorific content of brown coal is a really good way to think of it. So the energy to produce that ash, about 96% of it's coming from the material. Only 4% is enhanced through fossil fuel use at this stage. And any future improvement is going more towards autothermal. So it's going to be energy better than that. And we have had this valuable agricultural product, returning phosphorus. We talked about that. So we're familiar 24/7, and we're more confident, Jason, I think is key to hit for everyone. We're far more confident taking an ash or a char to market with confidence than we are about biosolids, because we do have these odor issues, we have these material handling and spreading issues, we have these contamination challenges, not only pathogens like with withholding periods, but then volatile organic compounds, microplastics, PFAS, and so on. And so for us, gasification is a very viable pathway. So heat treatment we want to retain. We're used to doing it and we're confident. Gasification at scale, however, is still a risk. Technology readiness at scale in Australia is a challenge. We all recognise that. And so we'll have to work on that, but we do have fluidized bed in incineration as a backup. That's your modern language for incineration. But basically, I wanted to go briefly beyond and what Eamon said about technology readiness. It's really building on our agri-ash experience. We have a mentality where we have a disposal mentality still. We ship the lowest order commodity out the door. And we want to make that someone else's problem. Whereas we need to change our framing of our industry and say, how do we work with the market? So customer and market knowledge, our manufacturing distribution, our revenue and cost model readiness. How do we upcycle this into the best products possible? And we've touched on that, and Eamon agrees. I absolutely agree, which is why, we do have some major research bids out there working on this social science space, learning from our local collaborators. So that's going to be critical for this to be successful.
Yeah, it's great. And I love that sort of framing around, I comment on the fact that kind of biosolids is the lazy option. And no initial disrespect to those in the biosolids space, but we think about it as a vehicle for value. It is on that lower order. And so I suppose then on the topic of kind of, how we create that higher order value through let's call it a byproduct, and start to kind of, I think, get the term waste out of our language. But the creation of that higher order value, does that start to sort of play into, so Jason and John, into that space that you're working in and the work that you've done to date around the kind of co-feedstock model, and whether that's, and interested then to understand, as part of picking up on the comments from Ben and Eamon on, how is that playing from your side around kind of market potential versus kind of cost optimization and benefit realization?
Yeah, could I jump? You go, Jace. I'll follow you.
Okay, thanks, John. John and I do this a lot. We're quite passionate about these spaces, and we're quite often in. I want to start from a leadership mindset perspective, right? So we have traditionally had the mindset that our role as businesses is that we treat wastewater. So we call our plants wastewater treatment plants. So that sets a prevailing mindset of, we treat it, we send it out to some waterway or to ocean or whatever else, and we're left with these other wastes that we then dispose of in some manner. And that has been the prevailing business model. What we need to do is we need to transition that mindset to a circular economy mindset, because you are what you think. So if we think of what comes into our plants as waste, it will always be treated as waste. If we think of it as resource, and those resources to be harvested in terms of energy and carbon and nutrients and water and various other things that get presented to us, then we will treat them differently. We will see them as resources, and therefore we'll undertake more circular economy opportunities. So IWN, through its circular economy program, is working with the United Nations Sustainability Staff College to actually create a circular economy leadership program for the water industry in Victoria, to start to shift that mindset, that leadership mindset around circular economy, as a way of, right at the front end, shifting how we behave as a sector with respect to resources. So I just wanted to preface that, John, because I think I know what you're about to say. So that sort of sets a little bit of context to that. But you always surprise me, so I could be wrong.
No worries. Thanks, Jason. John, you have the floor.
I'm just trying to come off mute then, but yeah, go. Craig, you go first.
All I was going to do is just say, just off the back of both of those comments, just noting too that the all the work that WASA and the water utilities have put into the Circular Economy Ministerial Advisory Group that Ben was talking about, their final report came out late last year. And if you haven't seen it, go and check it out, because one of the key recommendations in there that was adopted by them was to support, for the government to support supply market development for biochar. So you're looking at both sides, the demand pull and getting those demonstrations out there. And that's a key feature of the Australian New Zealand Biochar Industry Roadmap. And for those who may not have heard, the Danish government has just put 1.35 billion euro, not dollars, into supporting the biochar industry in Denmark, specifically for biochar and agriculture. And that's more than 10 times, actually nearly 20 times what we've been trying to seek to resource the roadmap here. So we're starting to build this momentum towards getting the market development and all of the other stuff that goes with it, all the regulatory consistencies, all those issues, all part of that stuff under the roadmap. So hopefully we will see this stuff start to really take off from now. And thanks to the water industry for their push on that as well.
Yeah, so where I was going to touch on, Jason, it was different, is one thing we haven't talked about today, and we sort of, Jace, you just touched on feedstocks. Our trial was really around understanding the best type of feedstock as well, to get the right type of temperatures, so we weren't supplementing other fuels to get the actual pyrolysis process to work. And in actual fact, when Jace will roll out our findings from the feedstock work that we've done, but we found that 60% shredded wooded pellets, which for us is going to be this woody waste from forestry that we'll use, and 35% of that trade waste material we had, and then 5% of our normal biosolids got us up to that around about the 700 to 850 C. And, as described in that, and I'm reading off this, so that's why my head's turning, but as described in the PFAS destruction by the US EPA guidance, that was the temperature we had to get to. So we were mucking around with Lucerne and FOGO from Wangaratta City Council, so food organic waste, to try and see which was actually our best feedstocks to get that sustainable heat, so we weren't having to use gas or something else to get going. The other part to this, though, and this is why this all sort of stacks up, why projects stack up. Sometimes it won't, because I've got to pay for gas, and we know the price of gas. Where we plan on building this larger phase 3 plant, around about the same size as what Logan's is, we actually are currently building a biomethane plant, which is right next door to AGIG's hydrogen plant, which all are generating heat. And at the same time, we're generating plenty of gas. So we can supplement other feedstocks that aren't going to have such calorific value, because I've basically got free gas that I can use through that furnace to get it to go, or the preheating phase. If I didn't have that, then the price might not stack up for the project, because I'm going to have to supplement it with some sort of fuel. And then to Ben's point, I'm actually introducing even more carbon emissions, which I've then got to start to manage. And you know, a lot of this is now being driven, and the project being driven is around projects that I can drive to generate ACCUs to offset against my Scope 1 emissions, which I've got 10,000 tonnes after all the work we've done at West Wodonga still as residual. So it's just circles within circles that are now starting to make a lot of sense, and why it's stacking up.
Great, thanks, John. Yeah, I think that sort of recognizing your local context and conditions and looking for those types of opportunities means that what I find really fascinating, interesting, and sort of exciting being able to support this space is that sort of, yeah, you're getting this broad spectrum of kind of applications and needs, and the work that's being done. So yeah, that's really interesting. But yeah, it also creates some really interesting challenges, which I think we will start to get to. But Craig, I'll hand over to you now to sort of take on the next section of the panel.
Yeah, well, it probably segues well, because we're starting to talk about how do we move from these pilots into commercialization, and we're talking about market maturity. So the question that we'd put together was, are we seeing a level of maturity being developed across the water sector towards this? Or can you comment at least at what stage on your journey towards maturity you think you are, based on your work with Biochar? And what in particular has surprised you the most so far? And it probably does segue to some of those challenges like energy balances and things like that. So can I kick off? Who would like to take it first? Maybe we'll go backwards. Ben, do you want to go first and we'll come backwards?
Well, hang on, you've been champing at the bit a bit. I don't mind.
Whoever wants to go.
All right, I'll go. I think where we're at in maturity, Craig, for us is not something in isolation. It's something with our regulators as well. And it's this holistic risk-based balance approach. What we've got are some challenges with community and some political concerns around heat treatment, heat versus cold treatment technologies, because there's a concern about feeding the beast, which is legitimate. But that's what we're talking about, burning red bin putrescible waste. And so we have a role to say, for source separated materials that should have a higher, optimal use, heat treatment should be one of the options on the table. So that's one of the key things that we haven't won in that space yet, but we're working on hard. And then the other one that I'd add for maturity, I've sort of, taken your question and run with it a bit, but it's also the regulation tension we find with our regulators on wanting circular economy outcomes, but then really focusing on chemicals and concern, and then not allowing all treatment options on the table with heat. And so we're getting some mixed messages, and we haven't really sorted ourselves out about what are those core principles we're chasing overall to have a holistic, regenerative, green society, because it all is like a legal line of levers. You pull down on one, another one ratchets up. We can't have it all. We need to know our best posture. And so we've got to work out regulatory instruments that allow that to occur.
Absolutely. And gee whiz, that you perfect segue into this stuff. So we have a policy and regulatory working group that Ben's a member of, chaired by Russ Martin and Anthony Reid. And we're actually currently working on what we're calling a decoupling policy, but basically it's about a policy position and a technical differential between linear waste to energy, combust it, get heat, use it once, which has been what we've all done in the past, and it's been good to get us to where we are now. but more circular and regenerative technologies that can produce those solids, liquids, and gases that you mentioned earlier, Ben, that it can have a role in circular economy. So we transition from linear towards circular and regenerative, and we're actually proposing a new energy from waste hierarchy, similar to what they've done in Queensland. Queensland's already set precedence under their energy from waste policy with a biofuels, looking at liquid fuels, but we're looking obviously at the solids with biochar and the gases, as John and others were talking about before. And this really is the future. And we think that could possibly give the pathway in multiple states towards that and hit those multiple sort of objectives at once. So fingers crossed, that's very close. And yeah, there's a lot of reviews up, including New South Wales with the EPA here on their resource recovery and energy from waste network. I'll move on then next to Eamon. So Eamon, do you want to try and jump
Yeah,
on that?
yeah, absolutely. So I think from a maturity perspective, I think there is reasonable confidence about thermal process technologies now. We're reasonably confident following our pilot trials with fluidized bed, very optimistic. Where I think there's less maturity is about the deployment readiness across the board. An end-to-end process. There's a few plants in a few places which are operating for a small number of years, and that's the biosolids to biochar, global map. So the next 24 months are going to make a massive difference in terms of that deployment readiness, I think. There's a lot of work happening to get that deployment readiness right. What's really surprised me is when you look at an end-to-end process, a substantial part of that process is drying wet biosolids to prepare feed for the reactor. And the selection of a drying technology, or the range of drying technologies, is enormous. With every imaginable treatment of that wet product in order to dry it, you could think of all starting from a different principle. And then, of course, anyone who's in the operational space for thermal plants will say the ancillaries are the Achilles heel. So that's very much how do you move your wet and dry solids around the process?
Yeah.
So from a maturity perspective, I think we're at a really crucial stage, and from a deployment maturity perspective, the next 2 years are going to be really, really important. And then, of course, it comes back to the big question: is how much is it going to cost to process a ton of biosolids long term, especially when we talk about scale up. And I'm really quite optimistic that with the technology that's available now and with the scale up potential of the technology, we could get to a very cost effective solution. But again, as I say, it's all the next couple of years are going to be critical.
Yeah, fantastic. And you guys are obviously one of the spearheads at that too. So yeah, this is some great work going on around the country. I might jump to John too, then come to Jason next. John, did you want to talk to this as well about where things are at in maturity and what are the key surprises you've seen on your journey?
Yeah, I'll probably put a bit of a positive spin on it, that the further we go into this and the further conversation, because one thing when we've done phase one and then we've been able to actually produce a product and then talk to councils and talk to larger industry that have a waste, really only limited by our thought process, really, because they've all got a desire to do something in a circular economy way that is not seeing things as waste but as a resource. So that's a real driver. On the other side of that, if you talk about barriers, Jason and I have had some initial conversations with EPA in Victoria, and I wouldn't say that we're getting any sort of pushback from EPA. I would say that we're all on a real early journey, just as we are on an early journey to understand what we can do with this. So the secret's really been, and certainly Jace, and you're probably on next, but lead to that. What Jason and I got out of that conversation with EPA is we can't just assume that we can go to the regulator and say, hey, we've got this new product and here's how we're going to treat it, and this is how we expect you to respond to that, because they're just as early in the journey as we are. So sharing that science. So when we actually showed them the results from our project, they were equally as excited because they've got to manage waste just as everybody else as a regulator. So they see that as an early days in adoption. So whether or not the industry will keep up or the regulator will keep up with the industry is going to be the challenge, because we do need to have that education piece to bring everybody along at the same time. That also includes our customers. So water corporations like ourselves, we're a non-for-profit business, so it's not like we can just throw money around on projects to trial things. Certainly for a small regional like ourselves, we don't have a lot of expendable cash by any means. It's all going back into growth, and we're all trying to meet housing targets and all other pressures at the moment with our services. So, and talking to our communities around circular economy outcomes, there is a real acceptance for that, but not if it's going to hurt my bill. So I'm not going to pay an extra $20 in my water bill so you can produce a product. So it really has to be a sustainable process, that it's either bringing in an extra revenue to a business to offset our customers' bills, or it is absolutely cost neutral. That is, some of the drivers in that space.
Yeah, thanks, John. Really good points on all that. And
Yeah.
maybe Jason, you want to follow on perfectly for that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I certainly agree with all of the comments so far. And I like what Ben said around it being an ecosystem of maturity. So you can't just have water corporations being the mature ones and everything else in the ecosystem's not kept up with that level of maturity. As John was saying, it is that education process. And at the moment, we're seeing this juxtaposition of legacy policy versus contemporary policy. Yeah. So you've got policies that were developed, 30, 40 years ago around waste. And when waste was a waste, now we're thinking of there's no such thing as waste, it's a material in transition. And we've got contemporary policies around circular economy, and there's this juxtaposition between those two policies, that the legacy policy standing in the way of contemporary policy and regulation for that matter. So it's about having the conversations, and certainly John and Vic Water and myself and IWN and WASA, we're all leading those conversations. And I think that's, it's not one organisation fighting to lead the conversation. We all need to be part of leading the conversation. The other thing I'll come back to in terms of maturity, when you do have maturity, and like I said before around the treatment of a waste as a waste, what we found in some of our trials is that we get the raw materials to do our trial and it's just full of rubbish, right? So, they've used a front end loader to scrape it up off the clay pan, and you've got, 80% biosolids and 20% clay, coming in because, again, it's treated as a waste. And so if we shift that mindset to this is actually a valuable raw material to a process to make biochar, you have a different way of treating that raw material so that you have some quality about that raw material. And so I think continuing to grow that maturity as an ecosystem from operator right through to regulator is a journey that we're still on.
Absolutely. Might be worth saying too that one of the things that we, in the 2 years of development on the roadmap, that message rang very strong. And one of the things we've done is in the budgeting for it is to try and allocate over 40% of the proposed budget towards commercial scale demonstrations of the uses of biochar across all soil and non-soil uses, industrial uses, so that there is actually some evidence out there and people can see where it's going and see that value and the quality, because there's only so many talks we can do where we can have all these users of biochar saying, hey, look, this is viable. For anyone who hasn't seen it, there's the Farmer's Guide released by ANSBIG has got case studies in there that looks at the economic analysis and also summarises another paper from 2019 by Professor Stephen Joseph and Sam Robb, which presented half a dozen or more case studies with a financial analysis and a net user benefit. One of the biggest things that came out of the international markets studies by the IBI and the USBI on biochar was the real need to shift our focus towards commercial, basically the business case for biochar. We know the environmental benefits, they're well promoted. I think we need to do a lot more on the business case for biochar and talk about that. So we actually have a supply markets working group, which is kicking off again this afternoon, and they'll be talking along with this. So if anyone's interested, please get in contact with Don to get involved, because that's going to be a key focus for it. There is a couple of questions in the chat there, and Ben, I might throw to this one to you because it alludes to that. From Kelly Hopewell, just asking, obviously, if the ash is so good and we've got all these people reusing it at nearly 100% due to the lime and phosphorus, are they going to be upset when we switch across to biochar, or are they going to be ready to switch because of the benefits?
Kelly, they're already upset. There's some people who are even using it for doing carbon farming. Very successful near Yass, a good example. But no, people will be upset because there's been New South Wales Department of Parliamentary case studies and science showing that basically one application of agri-ash over 5 years delivers the same phosphorus benefits, and also you're doing a patch correction with one pass on your land, the same as annual superphosphate over those 5 years outcome of the crop. So yes, they will be disappointed, but they don't know yet that they'll be actually happy, because it's going to have more carbon in it, and it's going to therefore have much better cation exchange capacity. It's going to have all these other soil, humus, and water holding potential benefits. That is really going to absolutely amplify the health of our soils, which in turn improves our climate resilience. So it will amplify success and resilience of our regions in the face of a changing climate.
Absolutely, and I guess obviously the more demonstrations we get out at scale now on the new product, the more those people say, "Hey, this could be even better." There's another question here too from Elliot Stewart, former WASA lead with biochar that everyone's familiar with up in Queensland. To you, Jace, it would be great if WASA could do some targeted advocacy with the likes of WAMA and Aora, as they don't seem to talk too much about biochar at the moment and seem to be more in favour of conventional waste to energy, particularly WAMA, and composting, of course, with Aora. I might just say one comment there. We've got an MOU in place with Aora, and we're working closely with them. We just did obviously a composting webinar just the other week with them, and fact sheets going out, and there is a real good synergy with there's a lot of talk about dealing with overs coming towards the biochar sector being handled from the compost sector. So that's that bit, but maybe if Ben and Jason want to talk to the WASA WAMA link there.
I wasn't expecting to be on the panel today, but I'll take it up quickly and to say that yeah, absolutely right. And look, I think as we are to reference the points that have been made around the maturing of the journey, we're at the same point around, I think, trying to mature that dialogue and discussion and partnership collaboration across other sector agencies as well. So whether it be Aora, ACOR, Bioenergy Australia, we're seeing all of these opportunities and the need really to have that dialogue and conversation, because as we've heard, as part of the range of applications and developments that are taking place, we can expand all of a sudden into all these sort of new market opportunities, and together with ANZVIC as sort of, I would say, foundation partner in terms of their advocacy and their support for biochar on a whole. That's really sort of the space that we're going into, and we're doing some work at the moment to really open up those doors and provide us with that platform to be able to have those dialogues and discussions, because I think we've seen the regulatory impacts come through as sort of initially bringing us all together and wanting to share and collaborate, but we're definitely seeing now the opportunities of the market potential to kind of broaden our own horizons as part of that discussion.
I'd only add very briefly to that. It's just a warning for us all to have some shared principles in this space, because basically, just like the Feed the Beast challenge that we have, there's also an energy stripping perspective that we can have here. What we are focusing on is harnessing that energy for a great optimal product. We're not just stealing energy and then flushing some other or disposing of some other waste. We all have to maintain discipline that is our focus for this to be successful, because if we don't, it becomes not snake oil industry, but certainly it becomes hazardous regulatory landscape that will be deterred. And so it can be a challenge for all of us to have to manage otherwise.
Yeah, messaging's key. There's a couple of related questions here. I don't know whether you want to move that with timing here, Jason. We can come back to them later. We've got a few more, but
There's one there on the heavy metal concern in biosolids biochar. I'm happy to address that because we have done a fair bit of work in that area on all the trials that we've done. So the first thing is that those heavy metals, they are in biosolids. So when you apply biosolids to land, they are absolutely leachable and will go into the soil. When you turn the biosolids, produce biochar from those biosolids, those heavy metals get caught up into the carbon lattice and they are no longer leachable. We have done some extensive leachability studies. The other thing that happens is that if you have land where synthetic fertilizers such as superphosphate have been applied over longitudinal timeframes, you will have cadmium and other heavy metals that are in there. Putting biochar to that land actually absorbs those heavy metals. So it's a way of remediating land that has existing contamination. And so we believe that biochar is a far better application to land than biosolids because the contaminants in terms of heavy metals are locked up. They do not leach and they are not bioavailable. So I just wanted to, and we've done an extensive amount of work on that. So
Craig, could I just, there's another question on there which is really interesting around bamboo as a feedstock. And there is work currently going on around using hemp as a feedstock. And the reason why hemp is really good is because hemp, WASA's done some work in this space as well around running a trial to use hemp to extract things like heavy metals and also PFAS out of soils. So you could have a contaminated soil, grow hemp, extract that, and then, as we've shown, put that through the biochar plant. And again, because that biochar and certainly something like hemp or bamboo would have a really long cellulose structure, it makes perfect powdered activated carbon to capture things like, as I said before, blue-green algae. On before, there was a comment around construction sites. The cost of putting hay bales and all of that. Instead of that, it's a better actual fit to put socks with activated carbon or carbon around there. So again, bamboo is a great feedstock.
Absolutely. And just going back to those things about the socks, there's a number of companies doing that, running trials with that as well. So if for those who haven't seen, there's actually a paper just released I received in the last month or two from Europe, where they were looking at in a circular way, basically using, as you said, hemp and things like that to bind on things like PFAS, and then deconstruct it through the pyrolysis and gasification processes to break it down safely and return that back again in a more circular way, rather than that what you'd mentioned before or others had about sending it off at very high cost to just go to incineration.
Yeah.
So
maybe, Craig, just to mention the heavy metals question there, it will be a barrier to land application for biosolids derived biochar until there is a change in regulation. And that process isn't going to be that's going to take time and evidence. RMIT are doing some research on stripping heavy metals from biosolids at present. Early days, but looks very viable. So there are potential alternative pathways to getting heavy metal free biosolids derived biochar, which could be optimal for land application with the higher nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, than biomass biochar. So lots of opportunities there.
Absolutely. And I might just quickly say that dovetails with for those that may not have heard, there's a proposal to develop an Australian standard for biochar over the next 12 months. And similar to the existing code of practice that ANZBIC developed, we're looking at probably heading fit for purpose end uses by having industrial grade chars, standard grade to go to soil that's fit for the food chain, and then the premium grades being for water treatment, filtration, and for feed chars. And what that does, and if I put a past regulators hat on, these guys are wanting to know if there's a legacy risk by putting these machines in that create a lot of black stuff. What if it can't go to soil? What else can it go to? And as Eamon just talked about, in the interim, having these industrial uses available like concrete roads and all these other things where it is bound and not leaching is a genuine, and then where it's adding performance enhancement as well. It's not just a dumping ground for waste. It's actually upcycling, to use the right words that everyone's choosing today. we're actually, there's a real good opportunity here. And I think as that standard comes in and more data from the groups like RMIT and the work that WASA and John's done and many others that are coming through, I think that's going to be good. The call for data, it also overlaps with the carbon credit methods. There was a bit of talk earlier in the call about the ACCU methods. There was a proposed biochar specific method last year, which was kind of end up being sort of not quite in the top 4, but they said, look, it's looking good. Water utilities are probably the strongest in there for it. That's now morphed into a potential adaptation of the facilities method that's currently there's a meeting, I think, proposed for tomorrow. So anyone who's interested, please get in contact with Don to find out about details for tomorrow. We can forward it on to you. Everyone's welcome into it. But basically, the call from the feds was, can we see data to support it? So from both a carbon credit perspective and from the quality perspective, the regulators are keen to see data. So all the work on piloting is really helpful. I might stop there and we'll go through to the next question with Jason, and then we're going to close out after that, I believe.
Yeah, thanks very much, Craig. Rather unsurprisingly, we've sort of had an amazing discussion, and so I like noting an eye on the time. I'm actually going to ask the panel if you can, think about a final message or take-home message that you'd like to leave those who are watching or listening as part of today, and thinking about kind of what those opportunities or the biggest priorities are. And maybe you've got a key message, not only for the audience, but for ANZBIG, WASA, Jason, in terms of representing Vic IW and Vic Water, but some of those association member group bodies that you'd like to pitch to say, this is what we want you to be doing going forward as well. Right. So are there any volunteers initially that want to come off? Otherwise, I'll just randomly pick somebody who maybe doesn't look as ready.
I'm happy to jump in. Oh,
okay, fine. Yeah,
after
go
you,
for it, Eamon. No, go for it, Eamon. All yours.
I was just gonna say I think from a water utility perspective, there's a couple of questions that probably need to be answered. One is scalability. For large wastewater treatment facilities, and Ben, you were talking about some reasonably large numbers in Icon Water there for the incinerator. What does it look like at that scale, and scale up? And then the next question is, of course, what does the cost look like at that scale? And can it be a very cost effective, as well as having the circular economy benefits, which we think are very real, the environmental benefits, which are very well established. So it's those kind of questions. We are on a pathway to try and answer those questions as best we can. The one of the drivers for us in terms of fluidized bed is the scalability. So a fluidized bed can be extremely large. There isn't mechanical limitations that you get with augers and other elements which have a mechanical threshold of scale. So that was one of the big drivers behind that fluidized bed side of things. Yeah. And then I suppose the whole implementation maturity and confidence about it, we are hoping to get a mobile plant commercially available in late 2026, and it's really about specific biosolids in a specific process at a location, going through a process and establishing that's a very effective continuous process that can operate months on end without having cleaning and operational challenges and unforeseen challenges. So I think we're all moving in the right direction, but that's our intent here, is to try and answer some of those questions.
Thanks, Eamon. I'll come to you now, Jason.
Thanks. Yeah, and at the end of the day, I see this as we're creating history, and we've got an amazing opportunity here. I think there's not just economic benefit, there's environmental benefit, and we need to continue to collaborate to grow the ecosystem and to work together to realise the opportunities that are before us. And as ANZBIG has said in its roadmap, there's a multi-billion-dollar opportunity here. But also what this means for the environment, the sequestering of carbon. The IPCC have come out and said that the economic benefit of the sequestering of that carbon And when we looked at this at Greater Western Water, when I was the innovation manager there, we had a complete rethink about how we did business cases. The way we traditionally think of a business case is, let's look at the new way of doing it versus our existing way of doing it. It doesn't stack up. Again, this is a leadership mindset. We said, well, we're not accounting here for the damage that we're doing to the environment. We're not accounting here for a change in regulation with the NEMP 3 coming in. So we used our base business case as a NEMP 3 scenario to compare pyrolysis and biochar. And it turned out we could give away the biochar and still be NPV positive. It was that compelling. Again, I come back to, the leadership conversation here. This is a change of mindset, and this is about us all collaborating together to really capitalize on this opportunity that's before us. So that's the message I'd like to leave everyone with today.
Great. Thanks, Jason. Nothing like a few push factors to open up the door to understand where the pull opportunities are. So that's really great. Ben, I'll come to you, and John, you'll be last.
All right. So I'm just going to answer Eamon's question really briefly. When we did our assessment of the options for heat treatment replacement, our Totex cost, gasification was the best. It was better than anaerobic digestion, and it also hit better on that multi-criteria analysis. And that's without accounting for biochar's benefits for sequestration and application of soil. And that really gets it greenhouse gas positive, like big time. But, it's a bit uncertain still at scale, but still really promising. But now let's go to the close. So I think we need to be bold, and we need to advocate for net good for people and planet. And biochar is one of the key ways we do that. We need all of our options on the table for this holistic triple bottom line approach, because we need safe circularity, and this is the way to achieve it. We need that local ecosystem support for uptake. There's no room for that disposal mentality. It's all about circularity. And so what I can see for us as the vision for the future is really we are these carbon recovery and sequestration enterprises. We are key to that for these healthy soils, healthy animals, metallurgy and pavements and manufacturing, these resilient landscapes that we need to have. This is a key way to achieve it. So we need to enable that and fight for it. That'd be my 2 cents.
Fantastic, Ben. I think that beautifully sums up sort of the alignment that we have with the Biochar Industry Group as well. John, tough act to follow, but no doubt you will deliver.
No, I'll probably finish with the challenge that Don Coyne put to me when I first started talking to him, probably back 4 or 5 years ago, about the water industry being involved in this. And Don sort of put out there that if the water industry is going to get involved, and there is this, and I'm glad someone brought up about heavy metals and the things that we've talked about today, if we don't do it right and we play like cowboys and one of us gets it wrong, it will be ruined for everybody. So I look to people like Craig and Don to keep us on track around making sure that the challenge is there, that we are ensuring that every box is ticked, because we only need to get asbestos in green waste on a school playground and the whole show's over. So, I think there is, I'm super passionate, and just like Ben is, super passionate about where we're going with this. I equally add some caution around let's do it right, because one of us stuffs it up, we stuff it up for all of us. So, I really need to make sure we tick those boxes.
Yeah. Great insight, great comment, John. And I think, if I can just briefly reflect on the fact of where we've come from over the last couple of years with the changing regulatory environment, I think if anything, what that has demonstrated to me has been that shared commitment, that shared passion around how we ensure that what it is that we're doing provides that net benefit to both the environment, the community, and customers. And I think that's a great starting point for us to always be able to engage with our regulators and policy and decision makers. And thank you very much from my side to Craig and Don and the team for this opportunity. And I'll hand over back to you, Craig and Don, to close.
Thanks, Jason. I think I might just tap into something that everyone's talked about there, including John's fantastic message there at the end. My exposure to the biochar industry when I first saw it is that it's almost too good to be true. And one of the problems, you can end up looking like a snake oil salesman, and I can end up being like that, because you get passionate. We all get, hey, there's all this good stuff it can do. But it's really, really important to acknowledge how risks are controlled and how we do avoid a front page of the Herald asbestos circularity issue like we've seen in the past, and MWU before, mixed waste organics with PFAS in the past. The regulators and the community have rightly been burnt before, and they're, excusing the pun, and they're looking for this to be done right. This is a perfect segue to the last thing I want to say. In the chat, Tim Charlton, who's the chair of our education and communications working group, and Tim and Sean and a group of us have been working together on what we call From Little Things, Big Things Grow. And it's basically a way to go to grassroots in the community and show them what biochar is, and rolling out at small scale, but having a workshop too where they see the bigger scale, what it's being used for, but it's hands-on with little Kentucky kilns doing just clean feedstocks like weeds, lantana, stuff that's got socialized, bushfire management. And this is the first one for that. The pilot's coming up 4th or 5th of April. So if I could say to anybody, please have a look at that. If you're in the region of north of Sydney or anywhere that you're going to be up here to have a look, please jump in and join in. The cost is really low. It's only $50. We've actually put in for a community grant with the local water utility here to see if they'd support it. We'd love to see these things free in the future. That's when we get people outside of our own church coming in to find out, well, what is this stuff? I've heard about it. But in doing that, we'll talk about all those things and the controls to keep it going well and safe circularity, as Ben said. Totally agree. Thanks for your time, everybody. And I'll hand over to Don, and I'll just let Don to do the expo plug as well. I've done the Newcastle workshop, but Don, if you want to mention the expo, that'd be great.
Yeah. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Jason, for facilitating the discussion today. It was fantastic. Thank you to all our panel. Yeah, really, really great to have a quality panel today to discuss this very important topic. And of course, all of you out there online, thank you for joining the discussion today. It's clear that biochar has a significant role to play in water management, from stormwater treatment to nutrient recovery and carbon sequestration, particularly when co-pyrolysed with feedstocks such as sustainable forestry residues. Our partnership with WASA is a crucial step in bridging the biochar and water sectors, and today's insights will help drive collaboration, policy support and market development. So the next steps, get involved. Our next event is a live one, as Craig mentioned, best practice biochar workshops. So that's at the Newcastle Town Hall and a Tea Gardens property on April 5 and 6. And we've put the registration link and the flyer in the chat there. Then next month's online webinar is about biochar's potential in carbon markets. It's on Thursday, April 24th from 12 to 1:30 AEST, and the session will provide insights into monetising biochar, its role in carbon credit generation, and how to scale industry adoption. So that should be a really good one next month. And finally, become a ANZBIG and/or WASA member. Help shape the future of biochar and water management. Join at anzbig.org or wasa.asn.au. And as Craig mentioned, calls for abstracts for the Biochar Expo 2025. Please submit your research and innovation abstracts by April 11. And sponsorship opportunities and also exhibition opportunities remain open until sold out. And you can visit the official website at anzbc.org.au, or for more details, you can contact me directly at execdirect@anzbig.org. So let's keep the momentum going, connect, collaborate, and lead the biochar water revolution. So thanks, everyone, and Charles.